It's been a great pleasure for both myself and my other partners to come and visit India for the first time. What I'd like to do this evening is I've got two presentations for you. One of them talks a lot about SaaS businesses and why they're so different to traditional businesses, and gives you a sense of the right ways to measure those businesses and to understand them, because traditional investors, traditional board members will have a hard time following what's going on in a SaaS business, and this will give you the tools to be able to deal with your board and understand how to explain to them why you're losing so much money, because that's the big problem that will happen in a SaaS business. The second presentation that I have for you is very different to that, and that is all about how to create a sales and marketing machine. So this is for the stage when you've built your product and you now need to take it to market and you want to understand how to get the maximum number of sales for that. I'm going to lay the groundwork here before talking about either of those topics with a very simple thing, which is I believe there are three fundamental phases in a startup's life. And I think the very first one is well known and well understood because of this book that came out on lean startups, and I think everybody understands what product market fit is and why that's so important. I think there's a second phase that starts to happen while you're finishing up getting to product market fit, and that is the search for a repeatable, scalable, and profitable sales model. And then there's a third phase once you've found that, where you hit the gas and start scaling the business. And I think knowing these three phases is really important, and understanding where you are in your life cycle will help you enormously, because the CEO's job is to have total clarity on what they need to do. And in my opinion, if you know these three steps, this is your roadmap as a CEO. Before you have product market fit, there's only one thing you should care about, which is how do I get to product market fit? And once I have that, the next thing I should be focused on is how do I create a repeatable, scalable sales model? Now, the one thing that I've found investors frequently get wrong is they understand that you should keep the burn rate really low while you're searching for product market fit. And the reason why is that you don't know how long it's going to take you. Sometimes it could take you 24 months. Sometimes I've seen people struggle for 3 or 4 years before they got product market fit. So keeping a burn rate low there is important. Where people go wrong a lot of the time is that they think they can fake repeatable sales model by hiring a lot of salespeople. And in fact, that's a disaster, and you don't want to be doing that, because it will ruin the ability to fine-tune the model and change it quickly. And you're much better off with a very small number of salespeople, and really the CEO, the founders, actually out in the sales process at that stage. And only scaling it when you're really clear that you have something that's actually working and you know how it works at that point in time. So, strangely enough, that is the one mistake that I see investors and board members making. The second mistake that I see them making is that there's a very serious mind shift that needs to take place at the point where you have found that repeatable scale sales model, and that is you now need to hit the gas. So all of a sudden, this is a very amusing board meeting that any of you who would have been there, HubSpot I think is a company that many of you know. Well, when we were at HubSpot, it became apparent that we did have a repeatable sales model. And we, the board, turned around to them and said, well, you need to start hiring aggressively and add 2 salespeople every single month. And they had a fit, and they said, well, this is crazy. You know, we've been spending so much time here saving money. We've been stopping hiring everybody. And the switch is quite hard to accomplish and do as a flip when that comes there. And being very aggressive at that moment in time is important, particularly in India at this moment in time, where so many of you are trying to do a land grab in a brand new space, and you don't want a competitor to emerge. And this is a really critical element there. So with that, let me switch into talking a little bit more about SaaS and getting very specifically narrowed. So jumping forward here, there is a really, many of you probably were aware of how the licensed software model worked. The key thing that this graph shows is that you spent money to acquire the customer, and that was this negative cash flow. This is the investment that you made to acquire the customer. But everything was fine, because immediately when you closed the deal with them, you got a very big check, and it more than covered the cost of that customer acquisition. The problem in the SaaS model is that the amount that we invest to acquire the customer is huge, and we don't get it back immediately. We get it back slowly over a long period of time. And the net result of that is that if you looked at your cash balance, you spend all this money to acquire the salesperson, to paying the salespeople and paying for marketing, and very slowly you start to come back to the point where you recover that investment there. And that is a negative cash flow period. And so the thing that is interesting here is that was just one customer that we lost all that money with. The more customers you start adding at the same time, the worse the problem gets here. So this is a very simple model that shows a constantly expanding sales force. So you can see the cost of customer acquisition, the amount that you're investing, is increasing every single month because you're adding more salespeople and adding more customers. And the best way to look at this here is on a cumulative basis. If you looked at your bank balance here, you're losing money, you're losing money, you're losing money, and then suddenly the model flips and all of those customers that you've got actually does start to pay back. But the problem is your investors will be panicking at a certain moment in time here because they're watching these losses getting bigger and they're asking, what the hell are you doing? You're increasing your spend on more salespeople, you're spending more money on marketing. This is crazy. So this is what we call the SaaS cash flow trough. And one of the board members at HubSpot is the CFO of NetSuite. And they've been a public company for a very long time. It's kind of interesting to talk to him. This is summarizing here. The thing that surprises many investors and boards of directors is that even with perfect execution, any acceleration of growth will be accompanied by a squeeze on profitability and cash flow. So this is interesting. This simply shows that if you add 10 customers a month, your losses will get much worse than if you're adding 2 customers per month. But the interesting thing about this is that the point in time where your business starts to come back to normal doesn't get pushed out a long way at all. It's just simply the depth of the trough that does get pushed out there. The other thing that Ron Gill pointed out is that at NetSuite, every time they started to get close to break even and the investors started getting excited, they actually decided, wait, this business is really working, let's hit the gas again. So they went into another dive. So it's been a consistent series of these dives for them. So it takes the right kind of people on your board to really help support you through this kind of a phase here. So this is your question that you were asking, which is, how do you know if all of your money is flowing out the door at a fast rate, is this a smart business to be investing in? And the answer is to look at unit economics. And the unit here that we're going to initially look at is the unit of one customer. Does this one customer actually make sense and pay back for me? So the question that you're asking here is, can I make more profit from my customers than it costs me to acquire them? And I think this is just a fundamental business question here. And the answer is to look at these 2 variables, cost of customer acquisition, CAC, and lifetime value of the customer. And I don't have time to accurately define these, but it's written up on the blog to get the exact details of this. But the one that I will look at for you in a second is the LTV one. So what you're looking for is a very straightforward thing, which is you need to make more money than you're spending to acquire them. It's pretty straightforward, right? So amazingly, most entrepreneurs are completely convinced that the day they launch their fabulous app, they're not going to have to spend any money to acquire customers. Everybody's going to know about this fabulous thing and rush to the App Store and download it, right? Unfortunately, wrong. Right now people are having to spend $6 per install of an app in the American app stores. Now I realize it's only about $2 here, but $2 is a lot of money to pay for an install. And obviously if you can get virality, that's fabulous, but everybody thinks they're going to get virality. The number of companies that actually get virality is very, very small out there. So to look at this lifetime of the customer, we have a formula which is pretty simple. We take the churn rate, which is the percentage of customers that leave at the end of either a month or a year, and we say the lifetime is going to be 1 divided by churn. So that tells you then your lifetime value is simply you multiply the gross margin that you make every year or the gross margin that you make every month by the number of months or number of years that they'll stay with you. And the important point I wanted to make on this slide, it's totally obvious, but if your lifetime is half because your churn rate instead of 1% is 2%, then your lifetime value of that customer is going to be half as well. Completely blatantly obvious. Nobody needs a graph to show them this, right? But what we really are trying to get across here is just how crucial churn is in this new business model. And I think this is the most important thing I'm going to try to get across to you today, is how to manage churn, how to understand that this is an important thing that we never had to worry about previously, that is now absolutely the religious element of running a SaaS business successfully. So I'd like to explain the difference between two kinds of churn. You can lose customers, but it's slightly different to losing dollars. And let's explain with this simple example how. So right here, we've got two customers only. One of them's paying us $5,000 every month. MRR stands for monthly recurring revenue. And one of them's only paying us $1,000. If at the end of the first year, we lose this small customer, we had 50% customer churn, but we only lost 17% of our revenue. So that's why those two numbers are different there. If, on the other hand, we lost the big customer, we still had 50% customer churn, but we had 83% revenue churn. Obvious, pretty straightforward. Now, what happens if I was able to grow the second customer so that instead of only getting $5,000 of revenue, I actually, a year later, I'm getting $7,000 of revenue? This is really cool. This is the breakthrough in SaaS. And this gives you what we call negative churn, or greater than 100% dollar retention rate. And this is just super important as a thing to aim for in your SaaS business. So negative churn happens when the expansion revenue from your existing customers is greater than the revenue that you lost from your customers that you churned out there. And you will lose customers. There's no getting around that. It's just impossible to stop it. So what you have to do is figure out a way to replace what you lost with growing revenue from the ones that you already had there. And effectively, that means that instead of thinking about a sales funnel that stops when we close the order, we now have to have a new and important second part of our sales funnel, which is how do we expand the revenue and keep these current customers that we've got there. So an interesting problem that we had at HubSpot is we got this totally wrong. We only had a single product, and it's the same price, $500 per month for every single customer. So we had nothing more to sell them. So we realized we had a mistake in the way we'd built the business. And fortunately, I'm going to avoid you guys making that mistake because you can take advantage of the lessons we learned there. So what you need to do to be able to create expansion revenue is have other things to sell the customer. And the trick to that is having variable pricing axes. So one axis that you can have is different product features. You can go from the basic edition to the pro edition to the enterprise edition. Another one would be to charge by users. Sometimes, like in the HubSpot's case, this axis doesn't work very well because there aren't many people in the marketing department, but they charge by the number of leads that you store inside of the HubSpot database. And that's really clever because one of the things HubSpot does so well for its customers is it helps them get more leads. So the more successful they are at helping their customers, the more money they can get. And the customer doesn't mind because it's value-based. You know, you're paying and you feel happy because you're getting good value from that then. So this is a fundamental learning. I would warn you, don't panic if you're a startup and you're only 6 months old. You don't need to solve this problem in year 1. This is like a year 2 or year 3 problem. But be aware of it and be thinking about it because it helps to just have it in the back of your mind. In the first year of your startup, all you need to care about is getting product market fit and getting the thing out there and getting customers to love it. This is sophistication that happens later on then. So again, just to make this clear here, what we're going to see is the revenue from our first set of customers will drop off and our upsell revenue is going to grow. And the amount that it grows above 100% is the negative churn amount there. And there's another way of expressing churn that you might hear is customer retention rate. It's just, so if you had 10% churn, you're going to have 90% retention rate. It's just the opposite of that number. And dollar retention rate is a number that is effectively like saying negative churn. So Zendesk, one of our more successful portfolio companies, they have 123% dollar retention rate. And it's a spectacular business. So I think this is one of the best investing secrets that I know of is find the SaaS companies that have these high dollar retention rates because they have this amazing thing where if they shut down their sales force completely and just focused on retaining customers, their businesses are going to grow at 23% per annum. It's a pretty amazing business when you have that going on then. So I still haven't finished beating you over the head with why churn is so important. So I want to hammer you one more time with this here. So let's look at a small company. If you're only 10 million in revenue and you've got a 2.5% monthly churn, by the end of that year, you will have lost 3 million of your revenue. And that isn't such a terrible problem. I mean, I can easily hire some salespeople to go and get another 3 million of revenue. Not a big deal. But If I'm 4 years later than that, or 3 years later than that, I've gotten to 100 million in revenue, and I've still got a 2.5% churn rate, I've got a huge problem on my hands. I've now got to find a new set of customers to replace 30 million of revenue. And that's nearly impossible to do. And this is what's tripped up companies like Constant Contact, who've totally hit a wall and stopped growing because they didn't solve this problem here. So it's a very difficult issue as you get bigger. So what this tells you is you can afford to have churn when you're small and young and not panic about it. But as you get bigger, you absolutely cannot afford to have it. So this is a very, very major problem for you. And again, just quickly to show you this, the importance of negative churn, I took the same simple model here and shows with normal churn of 2.5% how each of these cohorts, cohort being a group of people who signed up in month 1, and then a group of people in month 2, and a group of people in month 3, how the revenue drops off. And in month 40, we're doing about $150,000 in revenue. Now, if we change that to 2.5% negative churn, that same business is doing $400,000 in monthly recurring revenue. So that's just how huge of a difference it makes to the end state of where the business ends up. So in order to understand churn, we need a new tool, and the tool is cohort analysis. Cohort is a big, scary word, but let me just demystify it. It's a simple word for a group. And really what we mean is that the group who signed up in January is one cohort, and this shows me what's happening to that cohort over time. If I don't study the January group separately from the whole thing, I won't be able to track what's happening with churn. And what we're looking for in this graph is two things. One of them shows me I'm doing a better job here because I started off in January losing 15% of my customers in the first month, but look here, a short while later, I've managed to do much better in my first month loss, and I'm only losing 4% in the first month there. So that's an improvement here, and I can track that from this chart. And the second thing I might want to know is we were talking with Practo today, which I'm sure you guys all know is one of India's really interesting SaaS companies. And they have a fascinating thing where they lose quite a lot of customers in month 1, and then those same customers actually sign up again in month 3. So they would almost have like a 100% drop and then a negative number on the churn thing there. And so it's essentially showing you that there may be some patterns where you lose a lot of people in the early 3 months and then it may stabilize. And that's why that second axis is useful to have there. So to solve churn, we have a brand new department in our company. It's a customer success department. We used to have customer support. Nobody cared about them. We stuck them in a back room. We paid them very little money. We hoped that they didn't ever complain, and we got on with the job. Now we have a totally different situation. We need customer success very, very badly in our SaaS companies. So the one thing I want to point out here is that customer success is not the problem of just that one department. It is actually a multi-departmental effort. So if you're a product designer, the way you design the product can have a huge impact on whether your customers still use it. So you should be thinking about customer success and churn. The quality, if your product is buggy or has bad response time, then you will lose customers as well. So this is another group that will be caring about it. The salespeople can damage your churn by overselling the product or selling it to the wrong people where it's not really a good fit for them. Your marketing department should be thinking about marketing to your existing customers to get them to continue using or using new features in the product, not just only customers who haven't bought yet. So customer success is something you want to try to instill as a CEO all the way throughout the company. But I will say it's very good to have one person as an executive who's constantly thinking about it and who's constantly bullying all these other departments to be thinking about it and bringing that out there. So this is a new way of things that we have to do in SaaS businesses here. So one of the things that your customer success team will be tempted to do is to be lazy and to run around 1 month before the contract ends for one of your customers and then suddenly call them up and say, "Are you happy with the product? Let me fix it if you're not happy with it." This is a disaster. Focusing on retention a month before the contract expires is the wrong way to do customer success. And I want you to all think about your own experiences here. When you buy a new product, the day you take it home, you're excited about it. You want to play with it. You want to see how it can do cool things. And if it lets you down, what do? you put it away, you're disappointed, you're pretty negative about it, and it's much harder for somebody to come back later on and recover that situation and try to get you using it again. So what this tells you is that onboarding is the key thing to successful retention, and that means a different type of program to what you might have got before. And one of the things that I have seen going very well in some of our portfolio companies is they have a way of measuring whether the onboarding was successful. So onboarding is really some form of training, and you want the customer to then use the features that you've just trained them on, and you can measure in a SaaS product, are they using those features or are they not using them? And if they're not using them, then you know you failed in your onboarding, and you need to remediate and do that again and constantly kind of fix that. So that's the kind of loop that you might want to be thinking about as you get more sophisticated in the retention elements here. And you're also going to want to come up, HubSpot called it CHI, Customer Happiness Index, some way to score customers to predict whether they're in trouble or not, so you can actually use your resources on the ones that are most in trouble and not worry about the ones who are actually happy with the thing. So effectively, it's the simple way that people try to predict this is usage. Are they actually using the app? How often are they logging in? Things like that. But more sophisticated is to recognize that certain features, like if somebody logs into Facebook and they merely comment on somebody else's post, versus somebody who's logged in and put up their own photographs and posted stuff, this is a much more engaged customer than somebody who simply commented. So you score certain actions higher than other actions. But the one risk that I want to point out here is that usage can be a very misleading thing. So if you went into the CEO of a business that you've sold to and you said to them, I'm really happy because the people in your marketing department are spending all their time, 60 hours every week, using my product. Do you think the CEO is going to be happy? No, right? That's a heck of a lot of time that they're wasting in this damn piece of software. So what we want to try to get across here is that the CEO doesn't give a damn about usage. They care about business value. Is this application delivering, in HubSpot's case, more leads for me? Not, time that my people are spending at the keyboard fiddling around with this product. So to my mind, the best product that I use on the SaaS world is a product called SaneBox. And it's a product where I actually don't ever use it at all. It organizes my inbox for me, and I just signed in once and told it where my email address was. And when I log into my inbox every day, it's organized my email into different folders for me to make life simpler. I love that product. No usage at all, so you couldn't use the usage metric. So really what I'm trying to get across here is try to find a way to think, what is the business value that you're aiming to provide with your SaaS product, and try to find a way to measure that, because if you can do that, you have a fantastic argument when your contract's about to expire to be able to walk in and say to the CEO, our product's worth renewing because look how much value we've delivered to you in the following way, not how many hours of usage we delivered to you. That's not a valuable thing for them at all. So there's one other variable that I've discovered is very, very important in SaaS, and that is the time that it takes to recover cost of customer acquisition here. And the only thing I can do to help show you why this is so important is show you this graph here where I've got 3 different time periods to recover CAC. One of them is 12 months to recover CAC, which is this gold line in the middle. And then I'm showing if you can shorten it to 6 months, how fast your cash flow goes positive. And then if it's increased to 18 months, which is a pretty common thing, it shows you just how much worse your cash flow is. So it turns out, if you look at the wireless carriers, they don't recover their cost to acquire a customer quickly. It's not within 12 months. But they have huge access to capital. Most of you don't have huge access to capital. And the problem with acquiring customers and spending a long time to get it back is that you will burn through cash, particularly if you try to accelerate sales. So this is a spectacular metric to focus on. And it turns out that even if you have a ton of capital, if you can bring your time to recover CAC down, your business just takes off. And I've seen this now with several portfolio companies that I've been involved with where we didn't know for sure how important this was, but we focused on it, and we've seen that it's an unbelievably powerful metric for determining if you're doing well or not doing well. So I want to go back to answering the question here. you're in that nosedive, you're in the boardroom, and you've got an investor sitting there who's giving you hell because your losses are getting worse and worse and worse, and you need a way to calm them down and explain that actually this is going to be a fantastic business. There are two ways that I can tell you that do indicate that you have a good business. The first one is to say, is my lifetime value of my customer about 3 times greater or more than 3 times greater than my cost of customer acquisition? If that's the case, then I know I've got a profitable business. And secondly, if my months to recover CAC are less than 12, I know I've got a great business. And by the way, I relaxed this rule a little bit since I wrote this blog post. I think 18 months is fine, but just be aware you're going to chew through more capital, and you should try to get it shorter to 12 months if you can do. So these are the 2 key tests that an investor should be making, and certainly in the States, most people already know this, and this is a very key thing that they look for in an investor presentation. So the thing that we're just starting to talk about here is how do you, if you're running one of these businesses, what should you be measuring every month? How should you be understanding if you've got a successful business or not? Well, the answer is the most important thing is not your bookings, because that's misleading, but what are you doing in the way of either monthly recurring revenue or annual? And the reason why I've got both up here is if you're successful in getting yearly contracts, I would use ARR. But if you can't get yearly contracts and you're getting monthly contracts, use monthly recurring revenue. So what you want to do is recognize that your business is made up of this increase that you made in the monthly or the annual recurring revenue, and that has 3 components to it. How many new customers did you sign up, and how much monthly revenue did you get from them, plus how much expansion you got from your existing customers, minus how much you lost from the customers who churned. And the graph that you should be looking at is this one here. Time series graph that shows each of those 3 components, and then a bigger, heavier line for the sum of those 3 components there. This is the key graph. It's amazing how often we've had to kind of teach companies to bring this in, but without this graph, you are flying blind. You don't know whether you're doing well or not doing well in running a SaaS business. So the only other thing I want to cover here is the fact that there's a second way to look at a SaaS business, particularly important in India because so much marketing doesn't work in India, and it seems that the key way to get customers is to run a big sales force. So it is important to have a look at your salesperson costs and unit economics as well. And so if you look at how revenue builds for a SaaS salesperson, in the first month they join, they'll sign up some customers, and those people will keep paying. Second month they'll sign up some more customers, etc. So your revenue will build like that. And if you've got a churn rate, the revenue will slowly slope off there. Does this all make sense so far? Yeah. So let's look at the cash flow gap, because the revenue is not very big initially, but we're having to pay that salesperson quite a lot of money. So we've got a big hole in here, which is our cash gap for the salesperson. And if we look at this on this situation, it's 11 months before we get to break even. But if we look cumulatively, it's much worse than that. It took us 23 months before we recovered the amount of money that we invested in the salesperson. That's a long time to get a return on the, get back to break even then. And the total amount invested is the drop in that thing. It's $110,000 here. So hiring a salesperson turns out to be a very expensive investment. Thank God India's salespeople are a lot cheaper than America. Otherwise, a lot of these businesses that we're looking at here wouldn't work so well. But the good news is that if you can keep them, which is important because a lot of people can't keep salespeople very well, you get a great return on the investment when you come past that time point there. So remember we had this initial chart here. What happens when you get to the point where your business is ready to scale? Remember that HubSpot board meeting I told you where I said we had to hire 2 salespeople every month? Something interesting happens there, which is if we're adding 2 salespeople, instead of it being a small drop, the worst loss starts to become huge. Now these numbers are not that huge, but I can tell you at HubSpot they were gigantic. We were losing literally tens of millions of dollars every year. And your time to get to that point is quite far out. So the only way you can keep your investors comfortable is to model this out for them and show them that you know how deep it's going to be, how bad it's going to be, and when it's going to come right. And the second thing that I'll show you here, so in this case, it was $2.6 million invested in 32 months to get back to that recovery point. I did a model. This was actually done for HubSpot because we were trying to prove to them, how many should we be hiring? Should it be 3? Should it be 4? Should it be 1? An interesting thing that came out of this is if you hire 1 versus 2, you simply double the depth of the trough here, but you don't change the time that it takes for the trough to come back to positive there. So it's interesting just from a modeling standpoint.
When you do all these calculations,
grab a microphone if you wouldn't mind.
when you do all these calculations, you take that 0.35
A factor into consideration, yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that's where the 0.35 came in when we were doing this, yeah. So one little, again, guideline. I used to use the word rule, but I just use guidelines. I like to take the on-target earnings, OTE is on-target earnings, that means the base salary plus the commission, and I'd like to see the quota of a salesperson as at least 5 times. I'd say the target optimum number is 6 times for good companies. Now again, in the early startup days, don't panic if you're at 1 or 2, so long as you know in the future that you can improve this number, but this is a target for you to be aiming at as you go forward in the business there. So one other last thing I would tell you is that it makes a huge difference if you can get paid a year up front instead of monthly. And so this shows you here that your cash flow trough actually evaporates and you go into immediate cash flow positive. So again, unfortunately, I don't think India is going to work very well with this concept unless you're selling to enterprises. But it's still worth trying, and sometimes you could get 3 months in ahead instead of 6 months or something like that, and it can make a big difference. The last thing I want to end with on this presentation here is to give you an interesting discovery that I made, which is I was really fascinated by cost of customer acquisition, and I was studying with various different companies that I work with, Dropbox. I was looking at and thinking that these guys have a very simple freemium model, so they must have a very low cost of customer acquisition. And then I've got Zendesk, who've got this fantastic thing where they got to literally 12 million in an annual run rate with 1 half-time salesperson in Australia, because the product was just selling itself. Then we had Constant Contact, where I was familiar with Gail Goodman, who's on the board at HubSpot, and they had a very light touch inside sales model. And then we had a HubSpot where we actually had a very high touch. It was a complicated product to sell, HubSpot. So we were doing a lot of time, but inside salespeople. And I was also on the board of a company called Netezza, which was founded by a famous Indian entrepreneur called Jit Saxena. I don't know whether you guys know him. He's a fabulous guy. And this company got sold to IBM for $2 billion. And we were selling $1 million boxes for data warehouses, and it was costing us a fortune to sell them because we had a salesperson and an SE going out in the field, and we had to have them in Chicago, in San Francisco, all over the country here. So I had this sort of mental picture that somewhere along the line, the cost of customer acquisition must be roughly linearly associated with how complicated it is to sell. And I went and put the numbers down that I actually knew to be the case. $30 to $200 approximately for a Zendesk, sort of $300, actually it was $400 is exactly the number for Constant Contact, $5,000 at HubSpot, it's now really more like $8,000. And I knew the Netezza number was $100,000. When I graphed that, I discovered, wait a second, this is not a linear correlation here. What's really going on is that as you add human touch into the process of selling, the cost is going up exponentially. So that was a very interesting insight, and it's really made me personally very focused on how do you make selling happen without the salesperson. Let me explain why I like growth hacking. So it used to be, well, actually before I jump into that, let me really give the whole essence of this presentation for you. The essence of this presentation, the essence of this whole discussion is how to accelerate growth by working on your sales funnel, your sales and marketing funnel here. And there's something incredibly cool that I'm going to share with you, which is the whole of this process of improving sales and marketing can be summarized with 2 variables only. And I'll give the audience a chance to see if they know what those 2 variables are. There's only 2 things. There's actually a third as well, but the third one I'll come to later. But there's 2 fundamental things here that matter if you're going to optimize your funnel. Does anybody want to take a guess at what those 2 variables are?
Number of customers.
Sorry?
Number of customers.
Number of customers. Perfect. That's the first one. Conversion rate. Thank you. That's the second one. So that's it. It's unbelievably simple and straightforward. It's a fabulous thing that we can take such a complicated subject and bring it down to measuring 2 variables to know whether we succeeded or not. Increase the flow, which is the number of customers, and the conversion rate there. So this used to be the job of marketing and sales, but it's changed. So one reason why is because what happens online in America, now people don't go to websites here in India, so I may be wasting time with this slide, but if you're planning on selling in America, what you do online matters a lot. And marketing is often not strong enough to be able to change that. It takes programmers to do that. The product has become the salesperson. Think about how many times most of you are building mobile-first applications. You're not actually talking to that customer. The first thing that they know and experience with your company is the download of that product, and they start using it. If that product works well, it's a brilliant salesperson. If it works badly and you have to phone them up to explain why they had a bad time with it, that's a product who is acting as a salesperson, not a salesperson or a marketing person then. All of a sudden, we now have a rich amount of extra data that we never had before. We can see how people are navigating through our product. We can see where they're dropping off on the website. And we have a new set of skills required. And that's why I like this term growth hacker. It's essentially a person who combines all of these skills, inbound marketing skills, data science skills, customer experience, and product design skills. And the truth is that there are very few real growth hackers around. So what I'm actually telling you is if you're the CEO of a startup, you're going to need to try to create a growth hacking feeling in your company by breaking down the silos between the marketing department, the sales department, the product design department, and the data scientists, bringing them together in a meeting pretty regularly to discuss what's going on in your funnel. And I'll tell you the other trick that I've discovered. I have a lot of fun going into companies, startup companies, and fixing their funnels for them. And the very first thing I do is simple. I say to them, can you draw me your funnel? And they're all sure they can draw me their funnel, but as soon as they start trying to draw it, they discover that they actually can't. They're having difficulties and they're having to fiddle around. But as they work it through and they get it down on the board, amazing things happen. Their brains start automatically solving the problem. And so all I did was just make them draw this thing. So the one piece of advice I'd give to all of you, find a whiteboard or a big sheet of paper and draw your funnel out. Amazing things will happen as you start to get clarity on what's actually happening here. And we'll do that a bit in this meeting here. So I want to talk about the basics of funnel design. And essentially, a funnel is a really pretty straightforward thing. We're going to take suspects and pour them in at the top of the funnel, and we're going to hope to get closed deals out. And again, because we're in SaaS businesses, we care about the back end of the funnel as well, which is how do we retain them and grow them. And if we're really clever, we can actually get a viral loop going by turning our most loyal customers into advocates who will tell other people word of mouth. So that's our whole funnel that we're going to be working on today. So in a perfect world, we could actually do this with one single step. And it's interesting to examine why this isn't a perfect world. So imagine a website where I put it up and it says, come and buy Practo, software to help manage your doctor's practice. It's $9,999. Here's a quick video that shows how it works. Press the Buy Now button. So what we're doing here is important for you to think about. For each of you who's starting a business, think about the question, could I get my customers to buy with this one video? And the answer is probably no, but for each of you, the specific reasons why they wouldn't be ready to buy is going to be different because they're going to have different questions. Some of you might need to integrate with some existing product. Some of you might have a pricing problem. So knowing what those issues are is important because you are going to have to address them for the customer, and that's going to be part of your funnel design, is to make sure you actually walk them through these concerns. So common concerns will be, does this solve my specific problem? Is this actually the best product in the marketplace? I want to know who the competitors are and check them out first before I buy. Can I trust this company? Somebody used the trust word there. So lots of other things there. And this is not a complete list at all, but I recommend it's a good thought process for each of you. So what is a funnel, when we design it? It's basically a series of things that we can suggest that the customer does, actions that we're going to take. We're going to run a webinar. We're going to send out an email thing. We're going to do an event like this. And we're hoping when we take each of these actions that we're going to create movement. So this funnel design is about actions that create movement here. And the question that's interesting to ask is, how do we design these actions? And what I find here is that there's a big flaw. Most people have read some blog and they're going to copy somebody else's model for how their funnel worked. And I'm going to tell you that I believe that's wrong. I believe the key to funnel design is to be an expert at understanding your buyer and how they buy. And I'll give you a little fun example of this. Imagine you're at a train station, your train's going to come in about 30 minutes' time, you've got some time, you walk into a clothing store. Before you've even spent 2 steps in there, the salesperson's come up to you. "Can I help you, sir?" "Nope, I'm just in here to have a look around." They go away. You take 2 more steps in, the salesperson's back with some trousers and a jacket on their arm. "Can I show you what just came in? Our new collection just arrived. This would look very good on you, sir." And you're kind of backing away, and your whole experience is kind of not what you'd hoped for. Anybody who thinks this is annoying, what the salespersons do, please raise your hand. So everybody thinks that's annoying. So here's another situation. You need to go to a black tie wedding, but you don't own a bow tie, and you need one in a hurry. You go into Nordstrom, is our store in America, but your local store here. You can't see where the black ties are. You know they're in there somewhere along the line, and you're looking for a salesperson to help you find the damn black tie. You can't find a salesperson. How many of you find that annoying? So why do you find the salesperson really annoying in the first situation and the lack of the salesperson really annoying in the second situation? Let me explain to you what I think it is. It's where are they in the buyer's journey? And the buyer's journey can be summarized as being very roughly the awareness phase where you're not really even for sure aware of whether you want to buy clothes or not. And in the second one, you're very clear about the fact that you do want to buy something, you're ready to buy. And in between those is a stage called consideration. Now you can break this up and have more stages, but just fundamentally this is a big thing here. The number one mistake that I see most websites and salespeople making is that they're damn sure that every visitor who arrives on their website is already ready to buy and needs to have the salesperson jump down their throat and annoys the customer and damages the whole relationship building and the trust that could be done if you do it the right way. My personal belief is that customers want to have a relationship built with them and really like to have trust built with them. And if you can get trust, something funny happens, which is you won't be selling. The customer will turn around to you and say, "Tell me, what do you think I could do to solve this problem?" And without selling, all of a sudden you have the deal without being in that high pressure environment there. So we're going to try to build a funnel around this buying cycle here. And the other thing that happens in the funnel that's worthy of understanding here is, I was talking to ClearTax. All of you familiar with ClearTax, an Indian company? ClearTax has a specific trigger that makes their customer jump from here into purchase, which is, I think it's July is your tax date. So you have to suddenly file your taxes, and all of a sudden you've got to submit this damn form to the government. That's a trigger. So that's another thing that's really worth understanding is, what is the trigger for your company that causes the customer to have to buy your particular type of product then? Why this is useful is that you will recognize there are certain things that make some customers clearly more ready to buy than others by asking this question. Are you going through a product transition? That's your perfect question to figure out if they're ready to buy or not. But I'm going to show you something else here, which is I actually think there's a trick that you can use to create the trigger yourselves, and I'll show you that later on in the presentation, that you can create the trigger. Thank you very much. So I'm running out of time here, which is going to be a shame. So quickly, the B2B funnel we're going to create has 3 sections in it. The TOFU, top of the funnel, which is all about creating awareness. Consideration, which is where we call this the MOFU, in the middle of the funnel. And then the sales part of this, which is the bottom of the funnel. And then there's also a customer success piece at the end there. And I'll go through these very quickly. TOFU is about looking for suspects. And you know when you finish the top of the funnel, when you've got what we call a raw lead. And a raw lead is when we have contact information, like an email address in America, but I don't know that email works well in India. Something else that you can use to contact that person there. So that's what we're going to try to do at the top of the funnel. Some of you have a product where the need for the buyer is not something that they know and understand. So they don't even know that they have this pain because it's just not obvious to them. So a lot of you also may be selling to somebody who has a very clear need. So for example, that person who needs to go and see a doctor is in pain. They're going to go to Google and they're going to search, how do I find a doctor who's going to solve toothache or whatever the pain is there. So there's a different approach to these. For the latent need, we have to do education. For the apparent need, all we have to do is find out how do they go through their buying cycle when they've got the search going on and get ourselves fitted into the middle of that there. And there are two techniques here. There's inbound and outbound. I'm going to have to skip given the time here, but this is probably super important as a new startup's technique here. Even though we are huge believers in this, the problem with inbound marketing is it takes a long time to get going, and you need to get going quickly. This is the way you have to do it. It's like using a sledgehammer. It's very expensive, but at least you know it will get you some results here. And there's a lot of stuff I have on my blog about how this works and what have you. So then what is the middle of the funnel? In the middle of the funnel, we're going to take that raw lead and we're going to try to nurture them to get them to the point where they're actually ready to buy. And as we do this, we will discover that some of them are ready to buy, so we'll qualify them, and some of them won't be ready to buy, so we need to keep nurturing them until they are actually ready to buy. And the reason why the qualification stage is so important is that if you have to use a salesperson's time on somebody who's not ready to buy, it will cost you a fortune. So you only want your salespeople spending their time on the people that are actually really ready to buy. So you might have heard the term BANT, budget, authority, needs, and timing, as a way that we do qualification. And it's the marketing department's job of doing that. And by the time they've done that, they create what's called a marketing qualified lead that comes out the other end there. Now, something very interesting about nurturing here is that we've discovered that if you send a blanket email to everybody who's in your mailing list, you'll get let's say, a very low response rate to that. But if you send out a more personalized, slightly more personalized thing to all of the people who are maybe photographers or technical people or executives, you will get a 6.5 times higher open rate, is what we discovered at HubSpot. And if you get hyper-personal, you can get it 10 times higher than that again. So what we're going to want to do here is have a way to look at our database of people and segment them according to different characteristics and send personalized emails out to them in this phase here. And that requires us to have two kinds of data. The crown jewels of marketing are buyer attributes, the factual information, what company name, how big is the company, what vertical is it in, and then behavioral data. Which parts of our application have they been using? Which website pages did they visit? Did they open this email? Did they forward that on? Those are the behavioral things. If you can get this into a system, and this is an example of what HubSpot's page looks like for one of their prospects going through. So this is actually a HubSpot guy on my website. But they've got a way of looking at the videos and seeing that, oh, this person looked at 2 videos, and where did they actually watch to? That it turns out in this case, he watched 100% of the video, but if he'd only watched the first 2 minutes of it, we would have seen that in this data. So that's behavioral data. So that's what you're going to want to have, is some kind of a marketing automation data collection system that collects that. And also, if you have a product, you're going to want something like this is Tatango, but it shows you these are the people that are using your product that are worth calling now, because their usage shows you that they're well qualified to be followed up on. And you might also be interested in the ones who are not using your product who also follow on in a different way. This one is very important. Funnel math. So I mentioned to you raw lead, marketing qualified lead, sales accepts the lead, it's a different stage, turns into an opportunity, turns into a closed deal. If you know the conversion rates, something extremely magical can be done here, which is we can look at one closed deal and work backwards to realize that we need 5 opportunities to get to that one closed deal. We need 20 sales accepted leads, we need 25 marketing qualified leads, and we need 125 raw leads. And this is absolutely fundamental to how you run your businesses. With this data, you now actually know that if you forecast we're going to do 4 million next year, we better figure out how the hell we're going to generate these raw leads to be able to support the salespeople to do that. And it leads you to your proper budgeting and planning process. The last thing that I'll leave you with before I stop, which is every funnel I've ever looked at has blockage points, even if they're a very big company like an Oracle or a Cisco. And the thing that I've found that's fascinating is that there's a pattern behind these blockage points. The pattern happens because you are hoping your customers will do a step that they're not motivated to do. So you designed your funnel from the inside, the way you wanted it to work, but you didn't think carefully about how your customers are experiencing your funnel. And I will tell you that just by accident, I don't know quite why it was this way, but my personal thing that I love doing is putting myself in the mind of my customer and being expert at understanding how they will experience what we're trying to do to them in the sales funnel. So if you can do that, I promise you it will lead you to some big increases in your conversion rates in your funnel. It's a fabulous thing. So let's give you an example of how to do this. So this was a company that I'd invested in America called JBoss. And when I walked in there, they had 11 people in a small room. At 5 million people had downloaded the software. And I thought, great, we're going to have a fantastic time. 5 million immediate customers to start selling to. So I said, let's set up an email so that we can talk to these people. And I said, well, we don't have the email addresses. So I said, why didn't you ask for the email address when they were doing the download? And they said, well, we did, but it cut the download rate by 10x. Only a tenth of the people would sign up after we put that there, which is not surprising because all of you know that if somebody asks you for an email address, you don't want to give it, right? So this is an example of, it's being designed in a way that you wanted it to work, but the customer didn't want it to work. So here's my technique for solving this problem. Basically, for every step that's broken in your funnel, draw a line and write down what are the friction points or the customer concerns that are taking place at that step. And now try to think of, can we come up with a motivation, a reward, a thing to pull them through that, or change the step in some way that we can create an incentive to actually make them do the thing that they don't want to do. So in JBoss's case, they were selling their documentation for $23,000 every month, and it was paying the bill for all those 11 guys in the room. And I asked them if they would be willing to give it away free. It took them a little bit of time to agree with me, but when we did, we immediately started getting in. Actually, this doesn't give the answer to the thing, but we started getting 10,000 leads a month just from that motivation there, and it grew up to about 16,000, 17,000. So that was one example. So next one I'll give you is HubSpot. All of you will have the same problem as HubSpot, which is you're going to put up a website somewhere along the line. Maybe not in India because nobody has websites and goes on the web, but I think you know what I mean, which is you're going to want them to do something like downloading your app. Your problem is everybody else has also got the same desire, and there's limited attention span. So what HubSpot did to solve this problem is they came up with a website grader where you simply put in your URL, and then HubSpot worked away and spat out this incredible report that told you everything that was wrong with the search engine optimization of your website. And here's the really fun thing. It put a score up there on the right-hand side. Now, this happens to be my website, so it's unusual that it's got such a high score. But I know that every one of you has been through the Indian education system. And what do your parents do when you get a low mark? So this is a trigger, because people don't like to have low marks. They are very worried that their boss will find out that they did a bad job of the search engine optimization of their website. So what are they going to do? They're going to want to say, how do I fix that? This is an immediate need for me to improve the thing. So that causes them to want to engage with HubSpot at that point in time. It's a useful example here. But because this was a free tool, it got virally spread, and it then caused people to want to come and visit HubSpot. So the interesting thing about this here, free tools drive viral spread, low customer work required, very easy to get this thing to do something useful, high value delivered, the score creates the trigger, it builds trust. Remember we talked about trust? The fact that this was such a great report with so much useful information in it caused the customer to feel confident that this is a good company that really knew what it was talking about, a very professional group. And the last thing here is it shows a good example of growth hacking, because it wasn't the marketing department that came up with this product, but it was doing the job of marketing. It was the engineering department, because engineering can actually come up with much more valuable things than marketing can do that.
If you look at the last 5 years, the story in India from a startup and investing perspective has clearly been consumer, and more recently mobile consumer. And so the enterprise story has not